Tonight, 13 investigators learned a veteran police officer has pleaded guilty to a crime for refusing to help another officer. That convicted cop will no longer be able to serve on a police force anywhere in Indiana.
But what the officer actually did remains somewhat of a mystery. Bob Siegel, senior investigative reporter, explains what we know tonight and what we don't know, and why this unusual case is raising some big concerns.
An investigation into a longtime officer with the Richmond Police Department is now over. Court records show 2 weeks ago, Scott Kroll was in this Wayne County courtroom pleading guilty to the crime of refusal to aid an officer. The case is unusual because his initial appearance, plea hearing, and sentencing happened very quickly, all at the same time. And Kroll is not just any Richmond police officer. He was promoted to captain, supervisor of the Wayne County Drug Task Force, head of the county SWAT team, and he's a Richmond PD Supervisor of the Year. So what did he actually do to be convicted? Inside the courthouse, there is no probable cause affidavit in court records. No facts about the crime appear in his plea agreement. Not a single detail outlined in the judgment. No mention of what Scott Kroll did during his sentencing hearing. And the officer will not answer questions from 13 News. Not interested, his attorney told us. He considers it done and behind him, and he's ready to move on. So, even after his conviction, there is no public record to explain exactly why a high-ranking police officer was convicted of a crime. And that does not sit well with Indiana University law professor Jody Madeira.
But here we have no idea of the specific facts. We have no idea what constituted probable cause. We have no idea what failing to aid an officer even constituted in the context of this investigation. And I think we are at a critical moment where public trust in the government, public trust in police, public trust in prosecutorial officials needs to be higher.
To get answers, 13 investigators went to the special prosecutor who handled the officer's case.
What you have here is at least some pretty bad misconduct from an officer who should know better.
Chris Herkamp is the prosecutor in Franklin County who was called in to handle allegations of criminal activity by the Richmond police officer. Herkamp says the case started here last November while sheriff's deputies were investigating drug activity at this property just outside Richmond. The special prosecutor says Richmond police were not involved in the surveillance. So, an undercover sheriff's deputy was surprised to see a Richmond police officer pull up to the house.
The defendant, Mr. Kroll, who was at the time a captain with the Richmond Police Department, more or less inserted himself in that investigation in an improper way.
What does that mean? What actually happened?
There was a claim that perhaps he was trying to give them a heads up that other officers were possibly gearing up to apply for a search warrant and serve that on them.
He was tipping them off to the fact that they were under investigation.
Possibly.
That's the information that you have in the investigation report.
Yes. I think the best way you could say it was an incredible case of bad judgment to the point that, an officer ends up charged, pleads guilty, and is convicted of a crime.
That crime, refusing to aid an officer, is a misdemeanor. On the same day Captain Kroll visited this drug house and was seen talking with a suspected drug dealer at the heart of an undercover investigation, court documents show just a few hours later, sheriff's deputies got a search warrant and raided the property. One woman was charged with possession of methamphetamine, another with possession of cocaine. Both were convicted of felonies. The police officer who allegedly tried to tip them off was not. Why was he not charged with official misconduct, which is a felony, not a minor misdemeanor?
He was charged with what he was charged with, and there are reasons for it.
Was there any special treatment for this police officer?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This was a case with unique circumstances, and it was driven by the evidence, the strength of the evidence that we had, and also lack of evidence that we had in other areas.
That evidence was collected during a long investigation by Indiana State Police, and 13 Investigates has learned it was scheduled to be presented to a grand jury. But the special prosecutor says he instead opted for a plea agreement suggested by Kroll's attorney. The officer agreed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor and serve no jail time in exchange for voluntarily giving up the certification that's required to be a police officer in Indiana. That's a pretty big deal.
Sure is. Not only did he give his police powers up, he pled guilty to a crime. So now he has a criminal record. This was a just result.
The State Law Enforcement Training Board will decide next month whether to formally decertify the officer. If they do, his name will be added to a national database of officers who have lost their law enforcement certification. Richmond's police chief says Kroll's final date of employment was 2 weeks ago, the same day he pled guilty. The chief provided a more detailed statement about the situation, and we have that posted right now at WTHR.com.